Hello everyone, thank you for tuning in. Again, I am Katie Batesman, the Content Director at SheCanCode, and today we are discussing what is website accessibility and why is it so important. People with disabilities may have various challenges that can affect their ability to use the internet and access online content. The goal of website accessibility is to ensure that everyone, including individuals with disabilities, can access and interact with the content and functionality of a website with ease and without barriers. So in this episode, we discuss the term accessibility and why it's so important in web design with my fabulous guest for today, Sue Irving, Senior User Experience Designer, Lucie Farrington, UX Researcher, and Rachel Wright, Senior UX Researcher, all from the very group. Welcome, ladies. Thank you all so much for joining me today. Welcome to Spilling the Tea.
Hi, thank you for having us.
Hiya.
We've got so much to discuss in this episode, and it is an absolute treat to have three ladies from the very group with us today. So we're going to get cracking on a bit of background about each of you, if that's okay. Sue, should we start with you, please?
Yeah, of course. So I'm Sue. I'm a senior UX designer at the very group, as you've said. My background really is, I spent around 30 years in design actually, but I transitioned over into UX in about 2016. And my first role was like a junior UX designer over at the BBC. So I worked on children's games. And then moved into the voice and AI space. So that's where I really started to think about accessibility there. And then I've been at the very group since 2021 now, 2.5 years. That's me, really, my background.
You cut your teeth at the BBC. That must have been quite a baptism of fire to start in UX design.
It was fantastic, actually. Absolutely loved the BBC and the time I spent there. And like I say, that was really piqued my interest in accessibility and learning much more about it.
Yeah. Fab. And Lucie, yourself?
Yeah, so hi everyone. So I am fairly early in my career journey. So this is my first job post-uni. In terms of how I got into kind of this space, I actually did a placement year at the very group as part of my degree. So I did a sandwich year, I think it's called. So my degree was in marketing, but I joined the very group as a customer experience intern. So what that meant was I had a rotating role of all the jobs within the digital space. And then I got to choose who I stuck with, and it was UX. And yeah, came back after uni as a UX researcher, and I love it.
Amazing. I love a lot of things that you just said, because you said you did a placement, which lots of our community always wonder about whether they should be doing, the value in that. And you ended up with a really good job at the end at a really good company. So that's fantastic to hear, and something that I know our listeners would really love to hear. And also that you weren't techie. Did you think that you were going to fall into the tech? When you look back, do you say, and people ask you, my mum always used to say that to me, she's like, I've never understood what you do working in tech.
Yeah.
Are you one of those people?
Yeah, absolutely. I'm in terms of education wise, I've always been quite a creative person. I loved I did textiles and things like that, but I didn't realize how creative research can be as a role. We can really kind of design how we speak to customers, and we can be quite creative with how we do it that way. So yeah, I wasn't expecting to work in the tech space, but I do really like it. And in terms of a placement year, I would advise anyone to do it. It's the best thing I ever did.
Good, really good advice. That is, I know we get asked that so much on our live webinars that we do monthly, and a lot of the questions that come in are about work placements and the value that you get from them. So it's good that we've got another person that can vouch for that. Rachel, yourself.
Hi, I'm Rachel. I guess my path was a little bit different, actually. So I spent a long time in my career in financial services. I used to get involved in kind of the more traditional research, so surveys, focus groups, etc. I got made redundant from there, and I decided to do a master's degree. And it was in information and library management, but actually because it's all digital now, we learnt a lot about kind of information architecture, content management systems. So I really got interested in UX. And once I'd finished my degree or my master's, I then went to work back again in financial services, but it was to focus on, we had a great big database with frequently asked questions, all the keywords were wrong, etc. We just had to clean all that up. And then I started working with my now manager, but in a different organisation, and we started talking about kind of UX and the research side of it. So we set up our own lab. And so for the past kind of 10 years, I've been involved in specifically kind of UX research, and 4 of those have been spent in Bury. So, yeah.
Amazing. I love the fact that you said you were made redundant and then you just decided to go on and do a master's, and how sometimes one door closes and several others open for you.
Definitely. I'd tell anybody to just be brave and take a leap. Don't be worried about doing something different. And you often think of some of the technical subjects as being a bit scary. I didn't realise how technical we would get, but it's not coding, but actually there's still kind of a lot of stuff that you can learn, and we're a digital world these days, so we definitely all need to kind of get involved in that aspect.
Yes, definitely. So you've all got incredibly interesting stories of how you came into tech, and also what you do now, and levels of within your own company as well. So this is going to be a really interesting conversation today. We're going to talk a little bit about accessibility, which is something that we haven't had on the podcast as yet, and something that is so important. So it's I'm so pleased that we're finally discussing it on the podcast. So accessibility in web design is a term that people may have heard of, but may not understand. Can we start? Can you give a brief explanation of what it means?
So that is a really good question, actually. And I think it's really important how we frame what we mean by accessibility. So accessibility, it doesn't mean disability. It's actually a way of, if we think about how we build our digital products, our websites, our mobile apps, our services, and we need to support flexible interactions for our different user needs. So we need to give people a choice of how they want to interact with us. So these could be permanent, it could be temporary, or it could be situational. So what do we mean by that? That kind of like permanent, we could be, you know, it could be situational, it could be to do with touch. It might be a new parent carrying a child with one arm. And when we talk about people hearing, it might be that you're in a noisy place and you haven't got your earphones. You could be on a train or a tram. And also, you know, it could be like if somebody's speaking, it could be somebody might have like laryngitis and can't really talk. And so it's all about those different user access needs. And I think Microsoft do a really good infographic that we could share, which really kind of helps talk about that. And I think as well, when you think about accessibility, working at the BBC, I was always like, accessibility was wheelchairs, ramps, subtitles, all those things that we think of in the physical world. So I don't think that's an uncommon way to think of things, but that's how I thought, because I didn't have any you know, background as to think about digital accessibility. And it can be quite complex, and it can be quite off-putting as well. And I always think of it as around, it's like learning a foreign language. You've got to practice to be any good at it. But for me, my first steps into it really was thinking about it as 4 pillars. And one was vision. So we want to make it easy to see. Cognitive, we want to make it easy to understand. Motor, we want it to be easy to interact with. And hearing, we want to make it easy to hear. Now, that's quite simplistic, but it's a really good starting point to think about it in that way. It is quite complex, and it can be quite difficult. But yeah, it's like learning a language. The more you do, the better you get at it.
Yeah, you know what? You said something I hadn't even thought of, that you do immediately think of disability. And you're right, when you were at the BBC, that would be access and wheelchair access, and actually some of the ways that you describe that, then just even, you know, hearing, you might be someone that's really noisy. That's nothing to do with disability. That's such a misconception about accessibility of websites. And I know it came up recently on social media. There was a lot of chat about accessibility on social media recently, and I think again it was all the conversation was focused again around disabilities, whereas actually when you work in UX design, you're not thinking in that way at all. You're thinking of everybody.
Yeah.
And in terms of examples, so you gave some great ones there. Between you, can you give us some examples? You know, kind of how do you do that at the very group? Like, what are some examples? What are some of the things that you do in your day to day to improve accessibility?
I think if we go back to kind of basics and we think about people kind of using the web, we have a lot of customers though, or we have a lot of staff that think of screen readers. So having to kind of navigate through that website. So screen readers will use voice synthesizers to kind of read out content on a computer screen, but as well as kind of picking up the words, it also reads out features. So this is a menu, this is a search bar, and it can even explain kind of what's contained within that image. But we've learned through our research that there are various types of assistive technology that people use, so not just screen readers. So they might use alternative navigation, and this is whereby they could use their own voice to control kind of what they're looking at or what they want to see. They might use either eye movements to navigate around a page on a website. They might just want to zoom into the page. So in terms of how kind of that image or whatever they're looking at renders the text, it has to still be clear to them. We know that people have various different types of devices that they use. So even on your own mobile device, there is a range of settings for accessibility. So it could use voiceover, even for motion. So it could dim kind of any sort of images that are flashing or strobing features for people with kind of epilepsy, say. It could have a LED sort of flash for an alert of a notification because they are hard of hearing and they can't hear that. And because of all of those things that we need to take into consideration when we are recruiting our participants at Very, we have a range of tools. And one of the companies that we use is called Fable. And they have dedicated people who test on their behalf the things that we're sending them. So we can make sure we're not just kind of taking a gamble on when we're doing recruitment of getting people with that use all of these different types of kind of other types of technologies, but we are guaranteeing that we are speaking to those individuals that are using them on a day-to-day basis, really.
Talk about examples. I'm thinking, obviously, as somebody that hasn't ever worked in UX, this is all incredibly new to me. Has that been, I mean, like, Rachel, in your job, have you known about this for some time and working on it for some time? Is this something that obviously us as users, we don't know, or is that unique to the Very group? And, you know, do other people know about this?
I don't think it's unique. And I think the thing that really sparked it for us was Sue joining and the passion that she had. It's really easy to kind of fall into that sort of thing whereby you think, oh, it doesn't affect me, or I heard somebody say once that you can't be what you can't see. Yeah. So it's not at the front of your mind. And kind of when sort of Sue came in, she had a real passion for it, and it kind of flourished from there. I guess kind of, Sue, from your perspective as well, from sort of your background, but also kind of any sort of regulatory requirements. Can you tell us a bit more about those?
I think it's definitely a team game. It's you know, thank you, Rachel, for saying that. It's really kind, but it's definitely a team game. And I think we've had like a bit of a catalyst in terms of being able to focus more on accessibility because we're going through a tech migration. We're in quite a unique position. There is, you know, I worked at the BBC where accessibility was at the forefront of everything. And I know I was in quite a lucky position to be able to focus in on things. So with that, coming to the Very group, we've been lucky enough to focus on building out our new tech migration, our new tech stack. We're building out components in a new design system, and we're working towards WCAG guidelines level 2.1 AA. So it's Web Content Accessibility Guidelines is WCAG. Now that's just been updated to 2.2. So we're currently going back and like revisiting what we need to do in order to make our standards, meet that standard of WCAG 2.2. Now, Ironically, I believe the WCAG guidelines are quite inaccessible because they're written in quite legally global language, and they can be misinterpreted, and they're not an easy read. They're really not. And that's okay as long as people understand that, just because you don't fully understand it, like don't feel too bad about that. But there are some like wider resources and documentation that are much more easy to understand. I believe, and like we share this with our colleagues as well. .gov.uk is a really good one to kind of start focusing in on it. It's much more plain language. And I always give Co-op a shout out because I think Co-op have done an amazing content design job around their accessibility guidelines. So gov.uk and Co-op are some places to go for starters, I guess. But like I said, we're in a really unique position here at Very, because we're about to undergo this, we're working through this migration of our tech platform, and our director and the company have made it a key one of our main principles for tech migration is that we're going to be WCAG 2.2 AA accessible.
Amazing. Yeah, because I wanted to ask you about guidelines and standards. If you are a designer listening to this, I suppose that's the best place to get started, and you can't really go wrong if you're moving in that direction. But there's no sort of industry overarching standard or guidelines at the moment.
I would say WCAG is a global standard, and if you start to research that, like I say, WCAG 2.2 has just come out, but there's a whole host of things around 2.1, and it's a really good starting point. That's generally what globally what people that's the standard that people are hoping to meet.
Yeah. And in terms of the Very Group, obviously you're doing a lot of work around accessibility. Can you tell us a little bit about the work that the Very Group is doing to improve its website accessibility? Are there certain projects that you've been working on? Can you tell us a little bit about the things that we already see and should expect maybe more of on your website?
Yeah, definitely. So I think just to kind of start off, we've got a really open culture here at Very, so it's not something we've always had, but it's something that we really are working towards, in terms of everyone is on the same page about how important it is for our website to be accessible to everyone. I think, as Sue said, we're in a very unique position in terms of we're migrating all our tech over, so it's given us kind of that leeway to really focus on building the right thing for our customers. I think it's really important to note that the responsibility of accessibility isn't just down to an individual person or an individual team. It's down to everyone to do their bit. I think it's kind of easy to kind of focus it on the UX designers because they're designing the actual look and feel of the page, but there's a lot of elements that kind of go into building an accessible experience. So in terms of at Very, if anyone notices an issue with accessibility or notices anything or has a question about something on site, we do have a accessibility Slack channel, so things can be flagged in there. As researchers, we've also got a spreadsheet of issues that we've spotted, mainly in our Fable research, to ensure that everything is documented. And then also going forward, we've got a design system here at Very. So this is basically a collection of reusable components guided by these clear standards that can be assembled together to build any number of applications or websites. So we kind of outline the size that a header should be, the size that the body text should be, what buttons should look like, what secondary buttons should look like, things like that. So the accessibility is at the forefront of our design system. So the developers and the testers that are using it and the designers, they have access to how things should be built and how they should work. And they can also question that as well. If they don't think that's the right way, then we've got a very open feedback culture as well. In terms of, from a research perspective, it is our job to educate other parts of the business based on feedback that we get in our research sessions. I don't know if you want to talk a bit more about Fable and the participants on that tool.
Yeah, so Fable, the participants at the moment are based in Canada and America, which isn't ideal, but because of the nature of our business, which is primarily kind of shopping, everybody kind of shops online. But these participants have got very different setups, and their setup might depend on which device that they're using as well. So we have kind of so many credits, but we have access to experts over there as well. If we have kind of any questions about anything, it's really important that we do this type of research, because although there are guidelines in place, until you actually witness somebody going through a journey and the complications that they might have, and somebody who is zooming in on text versus using a screen reader versus using some form of alternative navigation, they've all got different requirements and they may be faced with different problems, but it brings those issues to life when you see an actual person having an issue with it rather than QA testing it, for example. The other things that we're trying to do, not just kind of from DCX's point of view, so thinking about kind of the digital journey, is we've been reaching out to other organisations. So Sue's reached out to the BBC and Co-op. We've also had Auto Trader come in and give us kind of a talk on the types of things that they're doing. So we're trying to learn from others. We have set up our own network within the Very group, which is called Very Accessible. So we're trying to kind of have an open conversation about some of the issues and the problems, but also to make sure that we are kind of creating understanding across kind of that there are different people with different needs, and these aren't as few and far between as you think, because once we get to a certain age, people's vision won't be brilliant, people's mobility won't be great, people's hearing isn't great either. So this could be age related and not just something necessarily that you're born with or that has happened kind of sort of later on in life. We also have a diversity and inclusion team within Very, so we've done some work for those, but it's trying to gel all of the different pieces of the organisation together, so we're all basically thinking along the same lines and encouraging others to think of all of our users and not just those that don't have those additional kind of access needs.
Yeah, so both of you, Rachel and Lucie, you both actually just mentioned so much about collaboration. Rachel, you were talking about collaborating with other companies as well, which is a great thing, and learning from each other. And Lucie, you were talking about collaborating internally with different teams, and it's everybody's effort. And I think I love the fact that you both said that, because in tech, you hear a lot of, you get in tech, you work very siloed, and that is kind of your job. And there's a big misconception about coming into the tech industry that you don't work really with other teams and other people, and it's kind of, you just sit in, you're very technical, you probably code for a living and that's all you do. Actually, the area that you work in, you just mentioned, you must have lots of soft skills that come up from that, and lots of communication skills. They're not technical skills, and actually you come into a role and get to collaborate internally and externally, by the sounds of it, with lots of other companies. Did you all think it was going to be like that when you came into tech, or did you think, what is a role going to be like in this area? Or did you know you were going to be collaborating with that many people?
I mean, I think that in terms of collaboration, I wasn't too sure. I think the way that tech is now is very different to what it was pre-COVID. So thinking about when we worked in the office, we used to see each other all the time. So I did my placement year in 2018, so I was based in the office. However, I came back in 2020, which was kind of a virtual world. And I was really nervous because the team had changed a little bit. And I was nervous about being, a full-fledged researcher rather than just, Lucie the intern. But it's actually been fantastic in terms of, popping on calls. I mean, we do see each other in the office a lot more now, but I think the fact that we do have tools like Fable that are digital, it just allows us to share and catch up with people a lot more.
Yeah, and it's as you said, it's just having the ability to work across lots of teams, and coming back in 2020 must have been quite an experience for you.
Yeah, it's a bit weird.
It sounds like you tackled that challenge well. For our listeners, staying on the route of careers, a lot of our listeners, they might be considering a career in web design. Is there any advice you would share with them about familiarising themselves in the area of web design?
Yeah, I think I would just say online, there is so much information out there and so many resources. So as Sue said, there are the WCAG guidelines you can look at. There's the Gov UK website, the Co-op's fantastic. The Co-op one's great because it's really interactive and really easy to digest as well. There's also experts that are worth following. So there's Tony Milden, there's Hassle Inclusion, and there's also a website called AbilityNet who also provide training resource. And I think as Rach touched on before, we've learned so much by reaching out to other teams on social media. Following people on LinkedIn is a great starting point. We've actually done knowledge shares with other businesses like Auto Trader, which was fantastic to see kind of how they share their knowledge in terms of accessibility. Google Lighthouse is what I think it's called, Google Lighthouse. They can process reports on how web pages are performing, and that's a really good starting point just to kind of understand the code behind things, because obviously I'm not technical at all, so just being able to understand how the code and the visual parts go hand in hand. But I think I would just emphasize, don't worry about knowing everything. I think everyone is in the same position at the minute where we're all learning, and don't put so much pressure on yourself to just know everything, because that's impossible.
Just brilliant advice. I think you hear that often, especially from ladies. I have a lot of guests on here who, when they move into a new role or even leadership role, the first thing they think is, I'm expected to know everything, and everybody's looking at me to have the answers for everything, which, as you said, is definitely not the case. And you mentioned there's some brilliant resources that you can draw upon to keep learning.
I think as well that we're trying to view it as not just a certain team's or a certain person's kind of responsibility. It's really important to kind of have that open culture, but don't just stop with the digital journey either. So I guess from ourselves, we would need to also understand if we can improve that digital journey by speaking to people who have issues kind of elsewhere. So say, for instance, how do we deal with customers on the phone who are hard of hearing or have kind of additional sort of needs or requirements? We offer delivery options whereby we have people taking items to somebody's house, or they've got to go and pick up a collect plus parcel. Could we improve our digital journey by enabling people who are providing that information to us so we can pick that up at the other end? So before we even deliver an item, we know that this person needs help with that item going upstairs, or they're kind of non-verbal, so potentially we have to communicate with them, or we understand that when we're communicating kind of with them that they need to write down, or they have a different way of communicating. So it's kind of encompassing all of that and not just thinking about kind of the coding aspect of it, but use the code to improve the journey, if that makes sense.
Yeah, definitely. Even the foundations behind what you're researching and improving accessibility, you're absolutely right. You can definitely use that in other areas throughout the business, which obviously would just be beneficial for everybody. I suppose if you're at a company that is has a good culture that can allow that and is very open, then why not? Yeah, absolutely.
I would say to everybody to be aware of the world around them. Yes. So I think I started to pick up from it more because my mum's mobility is not great, so we have to take her out in a wheelchair. You don't realise how bad access is into buildings or into bathrooms just until you start moving somebody around like that. And then it makes you start to think, well, how do people manage with a pushchair when they've got kind of or how do people manage when they've got bags and bags of shopping? It's just having that awareness, and I think once you start to develop that awareness, that makes you realize, how do we improve these things? And it's not just the physical side of it, but it's also kind of the digital side of it that could potentially help, even if it's just getting feedback on your site or understanding from those that it affects what could we do to improve things for you.
Yeah, agree. And once it's at the forefront of your mind, whether it's something that you're doing in everyday life, or you have a Sue that comes into your company and says, hey, I think we should all take notice of this. Just somebody putting it at the forefront of your mind, you're going to think about it in all areas from now on. I even know after this conversation, I'm going to be thinking about it in many parts of my life from now on. I'm going to ask you a little bit about interviewing. If someone is interviewing for a role on your team and they mention projects where they've improved accessibility, would this make them stand out as a candidate to you, or is it just something that you kind of just expect from web designers when they're interviewing with you nowadays?
So I definitely think that they would stand out. So they would be viewed kind of positively. But I think the most important thing, I think we'd all agree with this, is for them to have a passion to want to make a difference. And if they don't have any experience, but they've gone away and they've educated themselves, they've got this awareness, they want to improve things, that they are thinking about accessibility when they are designing or coding even. And it could be like me, that it's to do more with their life experiences as well as their work experiences. So I think this is just coming to the front whereby people are more aware of accessibility, but they might not have had that opportunity within the organisation that they're working for. So it's not that they wouldn't be viewed positively if they didn't have any work experience, but if they have the passion and they have that consideration within their designs, then that's definitely going to be viewed more positively than somebody that doesn't.
Yeah. And I suppose as well, if somebody just sort of name drops or just sort of drops in the word accessibility, you're going to know that's not a passion. You want to see some kind of project or something, you know. It's just that people might think, oh, it's a good buzzword to drop into an interview. You're going to see right through that, right?
Yeah, and I think that passion will take you, you know, it can take you far. You know, this isn't easy. It's tricky, it's difficult. You know, you're trying to, you know, get people on board. We've just created a very accessible, like, champions network within Very, you know, it's not easy. So that passion can take you a long way, you know, so that can keep you going sometimes when, you know, sometimes it might feel easy to give up, but yeah, it'll take you quite far. You know, you've got to care about it.
Yes, definitely. And we touched upon this a little bit earlier, Rachel. You were talking about accessibility, not just within digital, but in all aspects of life. And I suppose what I want to know is, improving accessibility is good for everybody, right? Businesses included, and everybody, right? It's kind of a non-brainer.
In a nutshell, yeah. I think yes. You know, there's a survey that was done in, I think it was 2019, called the Click Away Pound survey. So this is from a business perspective, but the online spending power of people with access needs in the UK at that point was £24.8 billion. So I can only imagine in the past few years that has increased. 86% of the users would spend more if there were fewer barriers, and 83% of them with access needs limit their shopping to sites that they know are accessible. I think not only in terms of being able to use the website, but it also benefits things for the business like SEO and things like that. So I think it's just really important as a business to make sure that we treat people fairly and make sure that they can access all the information they need on our website so they can buy the things that they want. You know, we had a Fable participant a couple of weeks ago, and she was asked to find herself, I think it was a dress or something like that, and she said, you know, even though I am blind, I do still want to look nice. I still like certain fabrics, I like certain colours, and I want to be able to find something that's right for me. And I think that is really important. You know, we want them to feel nice in their new dresses and whatnot. So yeah,
I agree. It is good for business, and it is good for those individuals as well, as you say. And even the fact that you as the Very Group collaborate with other businesses as well, it makes business sense for everybody to share your experiences and to move forward together. I completely agree. We're almost out of time, ladies. It is flying by. But I would like to know, what more can organisations do to make their websites more accessible? If there was kind of a checklist that you thought just companies could just get cracking on, what would that be?
It's kind of having that open culture and making sure that it doesn't just stop with the digital journey, and speaking to everybody that you need to, that has all of those customer touch points when we're dealing with customers. So there's a consistent story that we're telling as well.
You mentioned as well, sorry, I think it was Lucy, you mentioned earlier about just bringing in the feedback culture there. Rachel, you said open culture, and Lucy, earlier you said a good feedback culture. That's incredibly important as well, isn't it? Because if something isn't working, or you don't want to be the person that's always pointing out, you know what, I think that's wrong, or that's wrong.
Yeah.
And, you know, it's kind of, it's important to have a really good feedback culture where it doesn't come across like you're criticizing a team for saying, why haven't we done that, or this is obvious.
Yeah, definitely. And I think like particularly when we're playing back research, we do try and talk through the positives as well, you know, how easily someone has got through a certain page, or when a participant goes through a Fable study, they answer a series of 10 questions at the end of the process, and that creates something called an AUS score, which kind of rates the accessibility of that experience. And, you know, when that's really good, we'll talk about that and say, you know, this is above the average for Fable's AUS scores. And I think as well, just making sure that people have that understanding that it's not, accessibility isn't something that's ever done. It's not something that we can finish. We can't tick it off and be like, oh yeah, we've done accessibility now, let's go on to the next thing. You know, we can't wave our magic wand and say, you know, oh, all done. I think, you know, as long as you're going in the right direction, that's the most important thing. And I think that's what we need to kind of keep communicating team-wide, really.
Yeah.
And picking up on what Lucy was saying as well, nobody ever sets out to building an accessible website. You know, nobody ever that's nobody's aim to do that. So I think communication is really key, and having that open culture, learning culture. We're all learning at the same time, you know, we're all on this same learning journey. There's no experts here, you know, and we want to improve all our knowledge together. I think one thing for me from a design point of view is a design system is a great way to encourage that consistency from a design and a creative lens as well. So we have UX reviews, we have design crits, and we'll look at each other's work and we'll start asking those questions of, have you considered this? Have you considered that? We've made it a really safe psychological space to share our work and know that everybody just wants the best for each other and for the company as well, to make sure that we're designing the right things. The one thing that really, really stuck out to me as a designer, which I heard a few years ago at the BBC, was that, again, talking about accessibility and impairments, people have impairments. We've all got different impairments. I'm wearing glasses, you know, so people do have impairments, but we only disable them when we don't get things right. And I think that's a really powerful message.
Yes, definitely. And I completely agree. And I love the fact as well, obviously, we advocate for diversity in the workforce at SheCanCode, and the importance of diversity and diversity in thought, because what has been really interesting today about our conversation is you're all from different backgrounds, you all have different experience, and together you all collectively come together to work together to ensure that you are more mindful of people's needs. If you worked on a workforce where it was as everybody was from the same background, you probably wouldn't be moving forward as fast as you are in terms of accessibility, would you?
I think kind of, you're absolutely right. It's kind of the mix of people and the different skill sets and the different experiences in life. Sue and I are relatively close in age. Lucy's obviously kind of much younger. We all bring different things to the table, and our very accessible network. Obviously, there's us in there, there's other designers, there are developers in there, there are testers in there. We all bring something different to the table, and I think that's the most important thing. And I know that there are probably people listening to this who are in much smaller organisations. They might feel a bit daunted by all of this, but even as a larger organisation, we are still learning all the time. I would still say that we are relatively new to this, a lot of us, some more experienced than others. But it's never kind of sitting on your laurels thinking that, oh, we've got this, we know all of this. one of the most important things to us is actually speaking to those people and getting feedback from the people whose lives are impacted by this. And that's what's really important, as well as kind of understanding your regulations, as well as seeing what other companies out there are doing. It's really kind of getting that feedback from people whose lives are just affected by it day to day.
Yeah. Wonderful. Well, that is a lovely positive note to end it on. Thank you so much, ladies, Sue, Lucie and Rachel. Thank you so much for taking the time out of your busy days at the Very Group to come and have a chat with me today and share your insights. Thank you so much.
You're welcome.
Thank you.
Listeners, as always, thank you so much for joining us, and we hope to see you again next time.